So I'm Tal, and oh, amazing! Now I can see the screen. So I'm the founder of Lighttag, and I'll be talking to you about NLP products and what I've learned building and selling one. And let's jump into it. By the way, I'm doing this in video because I am under house arrest because I came from Germany. So I hope we won't pass this on through video. Let's jump into it. So again, I'm Tal Perry. This is my Twitter, Tweet the Talk. And I am a text miner, right? So a lot of people are NLP researchers, and I've just been mining text for a long time. And like my experience has been that the hardest part about getting things out of text, whether you want to classify documents or find entities or figure out relationships, the hardest part is just getting labeled data. And eventually just got so hard and frustrating, and there's so much of it that I built a tool and then a company called Lighttag, and we provide a SaaS service that helps people label data, essentially all the tooling that you need. And I'll get into that a bit later. But really what I want to talk about isn't so much Lighttag, but kind of what we think about when we think about NLP products in general. And so what we'll cover today in this talk is what NLP that I'm going to make a claim that NLP products are essentially about scaling expertise. And then I will claim that we believe that we can do that. We believe we can scale expertise because of BERT. And when I say BERT, I'm using that as kind of an umbrella term for everything that's been happening in NLP in the last few years. And after we say that, I'll go over like how we think about the 4 different categories of product in the NLP universe. And then the 2 really important claims, like things that you hopefully will inspire you when you build your own product, are 1, that your product needs to adapt to user data, and 2, that it needs to invoke trust. And that's the plan for the talk, so let's do it. All right, so let's start with a taxonomy of NLP problems, right? And the ones that are in the real world, right? So academics have their own set of problems, and then the ones that at least we've seen in the real world kind of look like this. So if you think about it, like you can divide this sort of into 2 axes, and on the very far right are really big problems, like Facebook scale, and on the left are problems that you can solve in Excel, and on the bottom are things you can outsource, and everything else is where we live, right? So like kind of applied NLP. So if you think about Facebook, right? Facebook, like a year and a half ago issued, or 2 years ago, issued an earnings warning because they have to hold 20,000 people on payroll to review the content that we put on Facebook so that they don't get blamed for manipulating elections again. And there's a lot of NLP involved in that, but most of us as individuals or companies don't have problems or businesses where you can justify holding 20,000 people on payroll just to moderate content. So we're going to call that a category that we're not going to think about. And on the other extreme is a lot of times you have like a small NLP problem, and essentially you can lock someone in a room, some junior analyst with an Excel, and have them do, I don't know, a search and a VLOOKUP, and eventually they'll solve the problem, right? In between those is kind of the universe that's more interesting. And on the bottom of that universe is things that are don't require a lot of domain expertise, and the data is insensitive, and then you can outsource it to companies like Figure 8 or Appen, who bought Figure 8, or Cloud Factory, one of our partners. And you can essentially say, hey, here's my data, here's my money, go label it, give me back what I want. I don't want to worry about this stuff. And we usually call that BPO, so business process outsourcing. And before I get into our category, there's actually something really interesting in the revenue model in BPO that kind of informs where we stand. So let's look into that. So the interesting thing is that Appen, that the company that bought Figure 8, they're public. So they publish their numbers. And in 2019, they did $536 million of revenue, right? So essentially $536 million of annotation. So that's a lot of annotation. And they publish how they break that down, right? So they break it down into 3 categories. They did 67 million on speech and image. So that's what we think about is like label data for speech, right? And for image, bounding boxes, and for NLP. And also Figure 8 is kind of the same business unit, same concept. So they did $110 million for labeling data for AI. But they did $430 million on relevance. And what is relevance? Relevance is like search relevance. So every time I have an e-com site or a Google search and the user is searching, and we want to make sure that the ranking is as best possible so that we can make money, that's relevance. And the interesting thing in this is that relevance is like 4 times bigger than the AI label data and stuff. And I find that really bizarre because I thought that everyone is, doing AI and everyone is obviously labeling data. So why is, I don't know anyone who's doing relevance, right? Just a few big companies as far as I'm concerned. So why is this number so much bigger, right? This is presumably the market for speech and images is tremendous. And I think that kind of leads us into, so that's the end of like this question about BPO revenue. And that kind of leads us into you, or where we live in kind of NLP product world. And that world tends to require expertise, right? So if you're doing NLP in a medical domain, so you're processing electronic medical records, or you're going through radiology reports or whatnot, you're going to need like a doctor or a surgeon to go through that data and impart their expertise on it. Right? If you're doing contract review or NDA disclosures or some other form of legal textual analytics, you're going to need a lawyer to analyze that data. If you are looking at, I don't know, some specific dialect of Arabic and you need someone who understands the language and the culture, you're going to bring in Tzvi Cheskeli, and that's the kind of expert you need. And sometimes you're just doing something that's very complicated linguistically, so you're going to need to bring in a linguist. But if you're lucky, then you can just make him go away with BERT. But, we don't know. Now, the thing is, if you think about like our scope of NLP problems, really what we're trying to do is scale those experts, right? We're trying to take our one expert and kind of put his expertise in a box so that we can replicate him a lot. And financially, what we're really trying to do is take kind of an expert like that we need to pay him a salary and we can only use 1 unit of him and he's essentially on our books an operating expense. We're trying to turn him into a capital expenditure, right? So we're going to have the expert sit once, label a bunch of data, and then put that expertise in a box that we can resell and reuse infinitely many times. And we believe that we can do that, right? So like that's kind of a mind-blowing claim. But we really believe that we can do that, and sometimes we even succeed. And the reason for that belief is BERT, right? And when I say BERT, not just a specific Google model, but all the things that have happened in NLP in history and specifically in the last few years. So that would be kind of the success we've seen in Google Translate or sequence models, and the success we've seen with BERT. And I don't know, Facebook's automated translation. So we've seen a lot of use cases of deep learning in NLP that have hit home. And everyone has a reason to believe, well, wow, if I try this and I feed my model a bunch of labeled data, I'm also going to get success. I'm going to scale my expert. So let's take a step back. Now we've made this point that NLP is about scaling our experts. Let's look at the taxonomy of NLP products, right? So it kind of goes like this pyramid with there are a bunch of different companies and products that kind of live on it. So at the very top, we have things like Google Search or LinkedIn or Facebook's Auto Translate, where there's really significant NLP that is kind of a small feature in a much larger product, right? Like the end user isn't even aware that like there could possibly be NLP here, but on the other hand, the scale is mind-blowing. Maybe a step below that is, so a few Israeli companies that I would say are on that scale are companies where NLP or AI are at their very core, but the end user doesn't care about them. So like LogGeeks is doing contract review automation. Zebra Medical is doing medical stuff. Gong is doing sales analytics. So their end customers don't really care about the NLP almost at all, but it's very much core to their business and to their product. And it's really interesting to look at how companies like these position themselves and think about their identity or communicate it to their end customers. Because if you look at like LogGeeks, for instance, there's not a word on here about NLP, even though they do loads of it. They're just happy people and a value proposition for the end user. And the same with Gong, who are doing sales analytics. So I'm talking about revenue intelligence and winning more deals. They're not talking about, wow, we built a speech recognition system and an entity detection system and whatnot. But that's the kind of layer before that does talk about these things. So companies like our sponsor today, Basis Technology, who provide a core set of linguistic analytics that are broad, or a company like Celerity, who does linguistic analytics for the financial domain, are selling NLP, and then their customers really do care about it. Now, all of these kind of live on top of two other layers. So kind of below that, when you're building an NLP system, obviously you need the developer tooling. So if you're using Python or TensorFlow as examples, those are products, right? We think about them as tools, but those are real products that we consume. Hugging Face's Transformer library is an open source code, but it's a product that we use and we're dependent on as we go up the stack. But all of these things, to become useful products, still rely on one layer below that, which is the ability to capture the expert knowledge and transfer it into the model, which becomes the linguistic product, which becomes the user-facing product, right? And so those would be annotation tools. So you might know Brat or TagTalk, and I happen to be the founder of LightTag, so we're one of those. And so kind of to summarize this point, when we think about kind of the taxonomy of the NLP space, it's really this layer of, hey, at the bottom, I'm capturing domain expertise. Above that, I have the tools to take domain expertise and turn it into a box. Above that is I have a box. Now it's a technical product. I'm selling NLP. Above that, I have a box that has scaled NLP. And now I'm refining that into something that the final customer actually cares about. So that would be like the LogGeeks and the Gongs. So there are a lot of hard things about products, but there are two hard things about NLP products that I want to talk about right now. So one is that your model that you're building and your customers, they don't fit. They're just not a match. And what do I mean? You start off with infinite copies of Tzvi Yechezkeli, right? So you had him label data, and now he's in a box, and you can recognize whatever it is that he recognizes as an NLP model, a RESTful endpoint, whatever. But when you come to your customer, they have a feeling that this is what you gave them, right? It kind of warped, because what ends up happening is that your customer's data is a bit different than what you trained on. And Andreessen Horowitz recently published kind of a thought position article where they said to maintain accuracy, Newton trading data needs to be continually captured and labeled and fed back into the system. And we all know this already, right? But the interesting part of the article that they wrote was that they interviewed their own companies and realized that companies spend up to 10 to 15% of their revenue on this process continuously. So if you think about like traditional SaaS products, we're able to like build them once and then sell them repeatedly. And we didn't have to spend 10 to 15% of revenue on just maintaining the accuracy of them. And when you do have to do that, it's going to make you very unhappy, like this young child here. So that's the end of this idea of that our models and our customers don't fit and why that's a problem for our product, right? The other problem, and I would dare say that this might even be a bigger one, is that customers can't trust our models, right? And we want them to trust. We want them to be able to feel like, hey, I can throw my baby to you and you're going to catch it, right? That's a lot of trust. But if you come to your customer and then they're evaluating your product and say you have this example, so you ask Google Translate, men are men and should clean the house, and Google Translate says, did you mean men are men and women should clean the house? Then that's going to have a big problem for your customer. They're not going to trust it. And the thing is that even though it's going to erode their trust, your data scientists probably aren't going to capture it, because regardless of the bias that's in here or the social incorrectness, this is going to make a data scientist happy because, oh my God, my model captured world knowledge. So in the way that a kind of a non-product oriented data science org is going to think about this, this is a great success. But as soon as you come to your customer, they're going to see this and they're like, oh my God, I cannot use this thing ever, go away, I can't trust your product. That's a big problem. They're going to feel like this, right? Like they're throwing their baby and nothing is there. So again, customers aren't able to trust our products, and that's no good. So we're going to end up feeling like that. And our customers are going to churn. Now, if our customers will churn because they can't trust our models and because our data doesn't fit their domain, they're going to think that Bird is broken, or we're going to think that Bird is broken, or that our products are broken. And if they think that, then our sales rep who's over there is going to be sad because he's not going to hit quota. And if our sales rep isn't going to hit quota, VP sales is going to be sad because none of his reps are hitting quota. And then the CEO is going to be sad because he's not hitting his earnings target, so he's not going to be able to raise a round. And then the whole company is going to be sad because the CEO is going to lay them off. So when our customers can't trust our models, and when our data doesn't fit our customers, that's a big problem, not just for the customer, not just for the product, but essentially for the whole AI-based org. So I have an idea or a thought about this, or kind of how we approach these problems. And in some sense, they're kind of obvious. So the first one is we want our products or our models to be able to adapt to the customer. And the other one, and we believe that we can do that because of BERT, right? Our whole premise when we're doing AI or NLP products is that, hey, if I label enough data, I'm going to get a model that works. That's why we started an AI-based company to begin with. And the other thing is we don't just want our models to adapt. We also want to make sure that the customer can trust the product that we're building, that we're giving them. So how can we instill this adaptation and trust? Well, we can label data, right? Or have the customer label data. But if we label data, then that's going to cost us a lot of money, that 10 to 15%, and it'll grow to 30. And if we tell the customer label data, then he's going to run away, right? He's just not going to be happy about that idea and run. So can we make the customer not run away from this? And I think that we can if we're able to give them a product and an experience that sparks joy, right? So how do we spark joy in labeling data, in training the model and getting it to adapt to the customers and the CERN? Well, the F-score, right, the metric that we usually come with as data scientists, that does not spark joy, right? It's a nice number, but it does not spark joy. But having a product that's easy to use, that does spark joy. And when the customer sees progress, that they label data and something magical happened, that does spark joy. And again, if we spark joy, then we have reason to believe that we can get the customers to stick around and adapt the model to their own domain. And if that happens, then essentially we get to the holy grail that labeling data sparks joy. So this is Larry Tesler. Larry Tesler passed away about a week and a half ago, and he's the man who invented copy-paste, amongst many other things. And I bring him up, this idea of copy-paste, because it's kind of a trivial user interaction that someone invented, like someone thought about it, and everybody knows. And that's really important, especially when we're working in NLP, because as opposed to image or speech or video, text is a domain that everyone has worked with. Everyone can copy paste. Everyone has selected or highlighted text. There are a lot of different user interactions with text that people are familiar with. And when we build NLP products, we can leverage those to make the user feel comfortable and familiar and have an excellent experience. So one example of that is search, right? So if I need to label data, I'm going to go through millions of documents. How do I get to the ones that are most relevant, right? So I can give the user the ability to search. And in this case, we're searching financial tweets to classify sentiment about different tweets. So if I let the user search for the word down, I'm going to get to a lot of places that have negative sentiment about a stock very quickly. And that's going to give the user a great experience because they're going to work very quickly and very efficiently. But search is also a great way to experts to impart knowledge. Now, I didn't make this up. There's a great paper from about 15 years ago with this amazing name, Why Label When You Can Search? And then like the longer subtitle, Alternatives to Active Learning for Applying Human Resources to Build Classification Models Under Extreme Class Imbalance. So long title aside, the beauty of this paper was saying, hey, if you let the user search, they're going to find the most relevant things for what the task is really quickly. And they have a bunch of graphs, right? And this is an AI conference. So I copy pasted one of the graphs from the paper, but they essentially show, hey, if I train a model, how many samples do I need how many labeled points do I need in order to get to whatever point in the AOC curve? When I'm using random selection of data, or when I'm using different kinds of active learning approaches, or when I'm using search, right? Just search. And as you can see, when you search, you go really, really fast because you can find the relevant data very, very quickly. And again, we were talking about labeling being expensive and something users don't want to do. If you minimize it and you maximize the reward you get from every action using user interactions like search, then you're going to reduce the user abhorrentness and maybe even make it a pleasant experience. The other thing is, so we talked about inspiring trust, and the way you do that is by showing the user that something is happening and what is happening, right? So once the user is labeled data, if we can show him predictions from our models and have him validate them, so yes or no, then the user is going to see the progress that's happening and get a feeling of, well, I should continue labeling data because something great is happening here, or sometimes it will happen that, hey, this is a disaster and I need to stop. Right, but usually it's going to be the good part, we hope. And one thing with a user interaction like this is that clicking a lot, it does not spark joy. But we can use UX patterns to make things that much easier. So if we know, for instance, that there are a lot of things that should be accepted, we can give the user one button to make that happen. And so I'm showing this obviously as an example from LightTag, but there's a broader point here, which is that as data scientists, a lot of time we think like, well, we showed them the prediction, or we gave them active learning, or we gave them a fancy model. But the more important point is, how do we make the user's interaction with that as quick and as easy and as pleasant as possible? And if we notice a place where the user has to click 4 times and we can reduce that to 1 time, that's a huge win, not just for the button, but for the user interaction, and that means the customer attention, the engagement with the end product. All right, so the other part of this process of kind of showing the user what the model has said and having him click yes or no is that it inspires trust. The first way that it inspires trust is because the user can visually see many examples and not just a metric, right? So they can really see what the model is doing and the model is adapting to them and give them a sense of control of what we're teaching, what is the model learning. But we can also use these things, to inspire even more trust by giving them the high-level reports that they need. So how are our models doing? Do they agree with experts? Where are the conflicts, right? So we can start generating reports that the user needs to make actionable decisions. And reporting isn't just a thing that MBAs want. Reporting is the way that we communicate where we stand and what people use to make decisions. Like, hey, should I double down on this product? Which is a decision that we wanted to make. So kind of to summarize that, if we give the user the feedback that they want, if we show them progress, if we give them the things to make decisions, and if we make that interaction easy, we're going to spark joy. And if we spark joy, then the user will stick around. Now, you can, of course, build all of these things yourself. And the reason I'm telling you this is that when we're sharing our knowledge from building an NLP product, so hopefully you can use it too when you build your own. But just in case you really want to use those particular features, we've already built them. So feel free to give us a call. And now to briefly summarize. So as I said before, we talked a bit about that NLP products are about scaling expertise. And that we believe that we can scale expertise because of BERT, because of this whole family of models in NLP and all of the progress we've seen. We looked at the 4 different categories of NLP products. So developer tools, expertise extraction tools, expertise in a box, and applied expertise in a box like Google searches and Gongs of the world. And then the 2 core ideas here have been that our products, to really penetrate the market, need to adapt to our end users' data, and that we need to invoke trust, right? It's not enough to have a great algorithm. We need to be able to invoke the user's trust in whatever it is that we're offering. And that's it. Any questions? Is there anyone here? Okay. Well, thank you very much.